Next Pats podcast is presented by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. We're going to have a massively interactive podcast this week because I want to hear from you, the listeners, about which path you would like to go down when it comes to the quarterback position, the future of the quarterback position here in New England. And we're not going to talk specifically about which quarterbacks you might want to get, but just the path or the model or the blueprint. Choose whichever descriptor you'd like, but there's a number of them out there with successful quarterbacks in today's NFL. And all these teams have done it differently, and they've taken a little different path, but they've all been in shoes similar to the ones that the Patriots are sporting in 2023, which is worst team in their conference, bottom of the division, drafting near the top of the next spring's draft. But not every team that has a successful quarterback took that quarterback near the top of the draft. Some went offensive line, some went receiver, some whiffed on those picks, still found their quarterback and found success. So we're going to put it to you, the listener, our beloved audience, whether you're on YouTube and you can leave a comment on YouTube, or if you're one of our Apple podcast listeners, we love you. We appreciate you there. If you could leave a comment, maybe even a rating, if you haven't done so yet. But if you could leave a comment with the path you'd like to take, we're going to dig deep into that in just a minute. We're also going to take some mailbag questions. But first, let's talk about the Patriots in the here and now. And I think it's relevant here on the Next Pats podcast because what happens in the here and now will impact the team moving forward. And no, I'm not talking about wins and losses and draft position, although we know what the stakes are there. I'm talking about roster management. And the question that I'm asking myself today is, should Robert Kraft be inserting himself into football operations decisions, into decisions with the 53-man Patriots active roster to help better set up his team for 2024 and beyond? What is in the best interests of the team? Is it to try to win games right now, or is it to better position yourself for the future? And I'm not talking about tanking. Boy, do I hate the tanking conversation. The players are always going to try to win. And I think even the head coach is always going to try to win. Maybe at times to the detriment of the future of the franchise, which is where ownership may have to come in. But it's a little bit of a conundrum for Robert Kraft. So why do I bring this up? There have been a couple things that have happened with the team in just the last few days where it makes me question in my own tiny little brain, what would Robert Kraft like to do? And would he ever make that known to Bill Belichick? I believe Bill Belichick is trying to win every single game this season in 2023. 3 wins, 2 wins, 4 wins, 8 wins. I really am not sure his approach changes. In fact, I've been led to believe it doesn't. Part of that might just be he doesn't know what it's like to be out of playoff contention at this point in the year. It's been a long, long, long time. We know that. And it's never been this bad for Bill Belichick. But if he's managing his roster in such a way that it gives this year's team the depth it needs to compete and try to win games this year, is that not maybe hurting next year's team? And the first move I want to talk about is Malik Cunningham signing with the active roster in Baltimore. Off the Patriots practice squad, he had the choice. It is not a waiver claim. I've heard it put out there on Felger and Maz and some other places that he was claimed and he had to go. Nope, not the case. You have the choice when you're on the practice squad. You're essentially a free agent. And so if a team comes to you and would like to sign you to the 53-man roster, almost always those players decide to go because it's a bump in pay. It's an opportunity to be, again, on the roster, have an opportunity to play. Whereas on the practice squad, unless you're a candidate to be elevated consistently, odds are you're not going to get a shot to truly compete. So Malik Cunningham goes. But it didn't have to be this way. If the Patriots liked him enough to invest time and energy on him to try to develop him at more than one position, they had him at receiver for the most part. But recently, Troy Brown has said that he's spending about half his time in the receiver room and half his time in the quarterback's room. And he's looked at times like he might be the backup to Bailey Zappi. We don't know that because Bailey Zappi, since he's become the starter, hasn't had to come out of any of these football games, but he was the backup back in week 6 when the Patriots were facing a must-win game in Vegas, and he was the number 2 to Mac Jones. Bailey Zappi was the emergency third quarterback, could not play in that game. Though he dressed, he would not have been eligible to play unless Mac Jones and Malik Cunningham had been ruled out of that game due to injury. So they liked him enough to make him the number 2 at one point. In what was at the time, I know it's easy to look back and say, well, the season was lost from the jump. But at the time, that was a must-win game. That was to sort of keep your realistic chances at making the postseason alive. They liked him well enough to do that, but they didn't like him well enough to find him an active 53-man roster spot for a 3-win team late in the season whose playoff chances have been snuffed out, who does have on the 53-man roster players like, and this is not to disparage any of these players, but they are borderline NFL roster players. Guys like Jeremiah Farms, young defensive lineman. Running back, JaMychal Hasty, who was added midseason. Linebacker, Christian Ellis, who was just claimed off of waivers. He was just released himself. Patriots have never worked with the guy outside of scouting him, I'm sure, coming out of college. And the pro scouting department doing their thing, but having him in the building and employing him, seeing what his daily habits are as a pro, they can't know. And yet they were willing to give him a 53-man roster spot, in my opinion, to try to win some games this year, to give the team the depth it needs this year, as opposed to somebody like Malik Cunningham, who may not contribute this year, who may not contribute next year, who may never pan out in the NFL. And I truly understand that. But again, I'm not the one who thought he was worthy of the backup quarterback job midseason. I'm not the one who thought he was worthy of all this time and energy from Bill O'Brien, Troy Brown, Ross Douglas, a number of offensive coaches who have tried to allow him to adapt to the pro game at more than one spot, which is difficult in and of itself. That wasn't me. That was the Patriots. And if you were to hit on Malik Cunningham, as opposed to somebody like JaMychal Hasty, isn't the boom factor there? Isn't that worth rolling the dice and giving him that active roster spot? And maybe the Patriots tried to offer him an active roster spot when the Ravens swooped in, no pun intended, and plucked him off the practice squad. But if they had just done it before, the Ravens wouldn't have had that opportunity. And so I get it. He hasn't shown him enough to maybe earn that active roster spot. But if you're projecting out and you're looking ahead, doesn't a guy that you thought had a little bit of promise at that position, who Dietrich Wise, who's a captain on this team, Super Bowl winner, a lot of respect in that locker room, a lot of respect from the coaching staff. He's on the defensive side watching Malik Cunningham every day. He told us earlier this week. He said if he gets an opportunity to play in a game, he's going to be electrifying. So make of that what you will. But a potentially electrifying, let's put it that way, potentially electrifying player at the game's most important position versus Christian Ellis, I just wonder if I'm the Kraft family, if I don't look at that and say, are we really thinking about the team's future right now? Because that's where our minds should be. How about Ramondre Stevenson? Let's talk about a couple of injury situations with the Patriots. Does Bill Belichick really want Ramondre Stevenson to come back this season? He's dealing with a high ankle sprain. 4 weeks left in the season. That is typically a 4 to 6 week type of injury. He's taking an active roster spot right now. Even if he gets healthy enough to play, do you want him to force it? Or would it be better for him and probably for you as a franchise? Again, I don't want to talk about tanking, but if one of your best players is dealing with an injury and could very easily, conceivably, sit out for the remainder of the season, and it doesn't really benefit you long-term to win games, even though you're going to try to win them, which I think they should do, isn't sitting a player the only method to quote-unquote tank or to quote-unquote help your chances of improving your draft position? So why not put him on IR, open up a roster spot, and maybe shoot up the young, promising, in some ways, quarterback that you've had with the team all year and allow him to be one of those guys at the bottom of the 53-man roster? How about Pop Douglas? Pop Douglas returned to practice on Wednesday, which everyone should be happy to hear. He's dealing with the second concussion of the season. He was still a limited participant in Wednesday's practice, but 2 concussions for a rookie. He's taken a lot of hard hits this year. He's undersized. We know that. And he will be in all likelihood, right? For the remainder of his career, unless he comes back next season looking like a tiger tank. What's best for him and what's best for the team, the future of the team. This guy looks like a young, promising player at a position where it's been really hard to find young, promising players for the Patriots. Is it best for the team to continue to run him out there in a lost season? And there would be some benefit to that. Sure. He'd get some in-game reps. I think he needs them. I'm sure the coaching staff knows he needs them in terms of understanding where he's supposed to be, snap to snap, understanding his assignments, understanding what the defense is trying to do. All that would be beneficial. Or is it better for him to sit, make sure he finishes the season healthy, come back next year ready to roll, and give him a lot more buffer time between his last concussion and the next time he takes the field with a helmet on? These are decisions that I would be thinking about if I'm Patriots ownership, that's all. Now, the conundrum is, if you're Robert Kraft, if you're Jonathan Kraft, and you do care about how it ends with Bill Belichick, are those hills, whether it's Malik Cunningham, although that hill is already behind you, Ramondre Stevens, are those hills that you want to die on? Are those the hills that you want this relationship with Bill Belichick to die on? And I'm not saying that would be Bill Belichick's reaction, is that he would be so upset that somebody is from the ownership level is trying to have a say with this 53-man roster. But if you are concerned and you are tentative in terms of how you approach this relationship as you get to the end of the season, those types of decisions, sitting Ramondre Stevenson, sitting Pop Douglas, those might be the kinds of calls you would be willing to look past. You'd be willing to shrug your shoulders at whichever way Bill Belichick decides to go, because you don't want there to be a battle at the end. That's the conundrum for Robert Kraft. But at the same time, your ownership, if you're not 100% sure where you're going next at the head coach position or the general manager position, especially, somebody, I would think, you would want somebody to be looking out for the long-term future of the franchise. And I think Bill Belichick is so wired to win and win now. It's what he's been doing for the better part of the last 2 decades, while also trying to balance the future and make sure his team is best suited to win down the road. But this is a season unlike any other. And if I'm the Kraft family, I want someone somewhere in the football operations side of things to be looking ahead and to be making decisions with those things in mind. And if you're not sure you're getting that from Bill Belichick, would you think about going down to the head coach's office, knocking on the door, and expressing your suggestions yourself? Tricky thing to do, though, if you want to make sure it ends nicely. All right, let's take a quick break here, come back, talk some quarterbacks, and take some of your questions. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/NBCSB and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. MA 21 plus and present in MA. Hope is here. First online real money wager only. $5 pregame moneyline wager required. $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. GamblingHelplineMA.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support. Play it smart from the start. GameSenseMA.com or call 1-800-GAM-1234. You know I love talking roster building. You know I love talking quarterbacks and the philosophies to how you should be adding those players at that position, when you should do it, why you should do it, how the roster should look when you decide to do it. And so I came up with this idea to just sort of look around the league and look at some of the most successful quarterbacks in the league and some of the best teams in the league and figure out how they did it. And let's just paint a very broad picture of what that model looks like, what that blueprint looks like, and figure out which one we like best before we fully dive into the draft. And we've already done it, right? You could go back and listen to old Next Pats episodes if you haven't already. We've got an episode on Heisman Trophy winner Jaden Daniels. We've got an episode on Heisman Trophy runner-up Michael Penix. We talked to Matt Castle about Caleb Williams. We've spoken to Mike Renner about why he thinks Drake May is the best quarterback in this year's draft class. But instead of really digging into those names a little bit further this week, I do like the idea, the broader picture, the big picture. What's behind door number one? What's behind door number two? Let's look at what's happened in recent NFL history and see which looks most palatable for the Patriots. Because a lot of these teams that are struggling now were at one point last in their division, had a really high draft pick, had to figure out what to do with it. Let's start with Patrick Mahomes. He's coming to Gillette Stadium this week with Travis Kelce, probably Taylor Swift. And no, I wouldn't expect Taylor Swift to ring the bell at Gillette Stadium if anybody was wondering. Okay. I just maybe put that out of your mind. I know Kenny Chesney did it. I don't think anybody wants Taylor Swift with her Chiefs jersey on, ringing the bell at Gillette, as much as the Crafts, I'm sure, appreciate her. The Patrick Mahomes model, to me, starts with the build that they started in 2023. They had a number one overall pick that year, and they took a tackle. And they signed a veteran in Alex Smith to take over the quarterback position. And boy, oh boy, did they hit on a tight end that year, too, in the third round in Travis Kelce. But the total bake time between where that build truly started and where it ended up with Patrick Mahomes in the saddle, running the show, immediately becoming one of the best quarterbacks we've ever seen, was 5 years. He sat a year, remember, but 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, it wasn't until 2018 where he really took off. So 5-year bake time for my pal, Tommy Curran, and others that look at this Patriots roster right now and say, just go get a big guy. Go get a tackle. They need an offensive lineman. You can figure out the quarterback situation later. Sign Baker Mayfield. Maybe Baker Mayfield's the best comp to Alex Smith, who's a veteran, obviously, former number one overall pick. Both of those guys were. Didn't exactly live up to that billing, but is good enough to play in this league. Is probably good enough to start in this league. If you want the tackle / Baker Mayfield model, that to me is the Chiefs model. You just got to make sure you find the guy several years later and you're willing to invest, go all in. You're pretty good in the meantime. The Chiefs were a good team by the time Patrick Mahomes got to them. So they were well built, but that build started in 2013. They obviously added pieces. They hit on Tyreek Hill, obvious home run in the later rounds for off-field reasons, but that was a 5-year bake time. How about the Josh Allen model? So to get to where the Bills were when they drafted Josh Allen, the Patriots have to basically get to 500. They ain't there yet. But the Bills were a 500 team when Josh Allen was eventually dropped in. They were sniffing the postseason with a veteran quarterback. And then they dropped the quarterback in. They added the receivers around him. And then the Bills really took off. But remember, when their build really started, gosh, you could go all the way back to 2014 when they were at the bottom of the league and they drafted Sammy Watkins in the top 5. Clemson receiver. Didn't pan out. That's a whiff. Would you have rather taken a quarterback that year? You probably would. I'm not saying Sammy Watkins is going to be Marvin Harrison or anybody else, but there's risk in going with the non-quarterback. I think some people make the mistake of assuming, well, you don't go quarterback there because you're going to hit on that receiver. You're going to hit on that tackle, and that gets your build going. And then you drop the quarterback in. That's really not what happened with the Buffalo Bills. They whiffed. They had Kyle Orton in there. They eventually got Tyrod Taylor in there. And Tyrod Taylor was a serviceable player, but not really a franchise quarterback. And they knew they needed to do more. So they drafted Josh Allen in 2018. But they built to be a 500 team from the bottom of the league and then dropped the quarterback in. Similar to the Chiefs structure. Chiefs were a better team. They were already a playoff team. The Bills were just sort of sniffing it. But the total bake time, as far as I'm concerned, to get Josh Allen in the saddle and contending, being one of the best teams in football, really after they added Stephon Diggs in 2020. So that's a 6-year build to me, the Josh Allen build. Is that the path you want? Pat Mahomes, 5 years. Josh Allen, 6 years. And yes, you're not a horrible football team in the meantime. Still a long time. Still a long time to get the guy that you really feel like is the guy. How about Jalen Hurts? Ready for a long-term build? Because yes, I know the Eagles made the Super Bowl a few years ago against the Patriots back in 2017. They had a very good defense. They had good defensive pieces, I should say that, especially up front. And they had a great offensive line. And that to me is really where their build started, because when Jalen Hurts got to the Eagles and started playing well, what was the engine that was really driving that team? It was what he did for their run game behind one of the best offensive lines in football. And what makes them one of the best offensive lines in football? Lane Johnson, Travis Kelce. Two guys that were drafted, one in Kelce over a decade ago, and Lane Johnson's about a decade ago now. First round pick, 4th overall in 2013. That's what started it for them. And they were lucky they were able to maintain. They were able to get all the way to a Super Bowl and win one. But it wasn't with a franchise quarterback, which is really what we're talking about here, right? How do you get the franchise quarterback, drop him in, and make it work? Does it have to be this long-term build like it was with Mahomes and Allen 5-6 years? Is that what we're looking at? I mean, Jalen Hurts, again, if you want to go back to when those two critical pieces were added to the offensive line that helped the young quarterback succeed eventually, you're talking 9 years. 9 years? It can't be that long, can it? But I'm sure the Eagles thought they were going about it in the right way, and I would never say that Lane Johnson was a bad pick. But they probably would have loved to hit on the quarterback sooner. They whiffed on Carson Wentz, right? Carson Wentz was a productive enough player in the MVP conversation at one point. But you whiff on a high-end quarterback when you thought that player was the right guy and that the team around him was the right team to be able to sustain him, and it wasn't. So then you're back to the drawing board, and that's how you end up with it taking a while to finally get the guy that you think is truly the guy in Jalen Hurts, and you give him the massive contract. I know they gave Carson Wentz a massive contract too. I think they would probably take that one back now after having done it. But I'm giving the total bake time there. I don't know why I'm going bake time here, just as an aside. Maybe it's the holiday season. A lot of cookies happening at the Perry household these days. I've eaten, I would say a conservative estimate is I've eaten 75 sugar cookies in the last week and a half. That's just conservative. But maybe that's why we're going there with bake time. The bake time for the Jalen Hurts model, in my opinion, is 9 years. You can fight me on that in the comments if you want as well. Let's go to Brock Purdy. Total bake time there, in my opinion, 3 years. I'm starting with the Nick Bosa, Deebo Samuel draft 2019. So it's 2019, 2020, 2021, and then in 2022, you're able to take a quarterback in the 7th round, drop him in, and it actually works. Now, they had pieces from previous drafts, George Kittle in 2017, Fred Warner in 2018, massively important guys to that team. But to me, and boy, did the Niners draft at the top of the draft over and over and over again, and boy, are the results very, very mixed. But they're a 4-12 team in 2018. That's about where the Patriots are now. The next year, they hit on the number 1 overall pick. I don't know if the Patriots are going to be 1 overall, but they take the best defensive player in the draft because they feel so strongly about him. They bypass, meanwhile, all kinds of quarterbacks that end up going pretty highly in that year's draft. The Niners were a 4-win team in 2018. So they're bottom of the league. They're drafting 2 overall, which might be where the Patriots end up. And the best quarterback on the board goes 1 pick ahead of them. Kyler Murray goes to Arizona. But instead of going with Daniel Jones, talking themselves into him, or Dwayne Haskins, or Drew Lock, who ended up going in the 2nd round that year, or Patriots legend Will Grier, who ends up going in the 3rd. Not that those guys were really, those last couple of names were ever even in the conversation to be top half of the 1st round guys. But instead of forcing it at quarterback, they go with the best defensive player. They go with a receiver who ends up being a great player for them. And that starts what to me is really a 3-year build. Yes, they had a couple of core pieces there that were necessary. But from there, they're able to add Brandon Ayuk. They're able to add a couple of offensive linemen. I mean, boy, but they continue to whiff in the draft. They thought they got the guy in Trey Lance in 2021, drop him into this great team that, by the way, went from basically worst to first, 2018 to 2019. Jimmy Garoppolo obviously is healthy in 2019. He takes them all the way to the Super Bowl, but he's not the franchise guy. He's not the young drafted franchise quarterback. So they needed to continue to add pieces like Dre Greenlaw to that linebacker level. You're able to add Trent Williams as a veteran, and you're off and running. You're able to add a franchise left tackle like Trent Williams, a veteran add. and you're off and running. But that to me is essentially a 3-year build to get your team where it needs to be able to drop in a young, not all that highly invested in quarterback and make it work. And they had to get lucky too, right? If they knew Brock Purdy was going to be as good as he is, and I don't think he's a next level talent or he's an all-world player or anything, but nobody thought, even dropped into a very good team, that Brock Purdy was going to be as good as he's been. So kudos to them for that. Last one I want to bring up here, and we're going to take a few questions. We're going to go. The Joe Burrow model. This to me is the one you shoot for if you're the Patriots. You got to hit. And the Patriots, probably it's looking like right now, they probably aren't going to have the number 1 overall pick. But boy, if you think that guy is there, the Joe Burrow model is why you go get him, and you get him right now. Because the Bengals went from one of the worst teams in the league to drafting Joe Burrow, remaining one of the worst teams in the league, drafting Jamar Chase, and absolutely taking off. They go from drafting near the top of the draft 2 years in a row to a double-digit win team and a Super Bowl contender in very short order. You have to hit on the quarterback, and you have to hit on the receivers. The Bengals are still looking for offensive line help. And maybe, just maybe, I think the Joe Burrow injury that he's dealing with now that has knocked him out for the season, the one that limited him early in the year, like, these to me are more fluky than overtime pounding that he's taken from not being protected, but he has not been protected. And the team's still been good. They've still been contending. And they've hit on some other picks. They've got some defensive players in there that have been absolutely critical to the different runs that they've been on. But they nailed the quarterback, not only the physical skill set, but the mental makeup. They nailed the receivers, and they took off. That was a 1-year bake time rise from one of the worst teams in the league to one of the best. Yes, they still sucked with young Joe Burrow, rookie Joe Burrow on the roster. And he ends up getting hurt that year because they couldn't protect him. He gets healthy. You get him a receiver or two, and he's phenomenal. So that, to me, is the path that I would choose, but I don't want to sway you. We want to hear from you in the comments. Leave a comment on YouTube. Leave a comment on Apple Podcasts. Let us know. You go on the Patrick Mahomes blueprint, which I had as a 5-year bake time. Josh Allen, 6-year bake time. Jalen Hurts, 9-year bake time. Woof. Brock Purdy, 3-year bake time, or Joe Burrow, 1-year bake time. Are you like me? Are you just in it for the immediate gratification? Does the lowest number on that list interest you the most? Or does the risk scare you? Because the risk is, well, because you didn't have that tackle, and you don't have that receiver, and you don't have the weapons. Not only is the quarterback not going to be able to perform well, he might get hurt, as Joe Burrow did, and you might break him mentally, as we saw with the Patriots' first-round quarterback from 2021 in the last couple of years here. It took a little longer with Mac Jones. It wasn't a one-and-done sort of thing, but eventually that's what happened. The situation was poor, and we've talked about this ad nauseum, but and maybe he wasn't built for it in the first place. I don't really think that's true. I think if he had been handled a little bit differently, you'd see much different results. Nature versus nurture. But if you feel like the guy has the physical skill set and he has the nature to be able to withstand what will be an adverse situation in 2024 in all likelihood, even if you hit on your free agent signings, even if you hit on your draft picks, probably not a 1-year rebuild offensively for the Patriots. Are you still willing to go get that guy the way the Bengals did? Are you still willing to go get a Drake May or Caleb Williams? Or maybe it's a Jaden Daniels if you finish the season with 4 or 5 wins and you end up with a 4th or 5th pick. Do you feel strongly enough about that person, not the player, but the person, that the person can withstand that lead, develop into a leader despite brutal circumstances, and eventually take your team where you want to go? I love that blueprint conversation, the model conversation. Again, let us know what you think, which way you would like to go, and we'll keep that in mind as we roll closer and closer to this year's draft. All right, let's go to the mailbag. We'll try to fire off a few answers for these really quickly here. Hopefully everybody is having a phenomenal week. Everybody's done all their Christmas shopping. I'm sure no one is finished yet. If you're like me, you definitely aren't, but you're rolling around town. Maybe you're looking for gifts right now. Listen to the podcast. We appreciate you. Let's start with Patriot 37. And he's asking about Mac Jones's trade value. And I'm looking at Mac Jones and I'm looking at his draft class. And I'm looking at Trey Lance, who was recently traded for a 4th-round pick. He obviously had a full season more left on his contract than Mac Jones does now because that trade happened several months ago. Would the Patriots ever be able to get something similar for him? I don't think so. To me, it's a late day 3 pick. That's my guess. Even though he's shown more on the field than Trey Lance has, I think if you're a prospective team and you're looking for a young quarterback and you look at Trey Lance, you're buying on the upside. Whereas Mac Jones, you have a better sense of what he is, but you also have a better sense of what he isn't based on what he's gone through lately. And so I think there's an argument for the value to be similar in a trade, but I would go a little bit lower than what Lance got, again, because of the term left on the deal, right? He's going into the last year of his contract. So it's essentially a 1-year deal for a player that you might sign as a backup or you might trade for as a backup, excuse me. That to me, if you got anything more than a 5th-round pick would be surprising. All right, next one. Cone Writer says, what will the Patriots do at general manager? What should they do at general manager? This to me is the toughest question to answer about this Patriots offseason, at least the early part of it, because I've said it here. I've said it on television. We've talked about it at length. Gerard Mayo is the odds-on favorite to be the next head coach for the Patriots. Does that mean it's locked in? Does that mean it's a done deal? No, but he's the odds-on favorite. I have an answer for that question. I don't really have an answer for the Patriots general manager question. And we talked about this on the most recent Patriots Talk podcast. But what the Krafts might find is that it is a little bit more difficult than maybe they were anticipating staffing that job. Because if they want Gerard Mayo, does that limit their pool of candidates? Meaning, if you're a highly valued free agent, prospective general manager, say you're Adam Peters from San Francisco, it seems like he's going to be the number 1 guy on most teams' lists. Wouldn't you want to go somewhere where you have a say in who is the head coach of the football team? Who is working alongside you day to day, week to week, putting together the roster, maybe a share football brain with that person. Maybe you've shared an office with that person at some point in time over the course of your careers. Now, Peters has some Patriots background, which might interest the Krafts. Maybe there's a relationship there that I honestly, I truly don't know. But he has spent time in the Patriots front office, but he's been other places too. And he has all kinds of relationships around the league. Would he be comfortable with Robert Kraft saying to him, we love you for the job. We're going to make you one of the highest paid general managers in football. Gerard Mayo is going to be your head coach. That I don't know. I wonder if, again, something I pointed out on the Patriots Talk podcast, the Krafts being who they are as business people, when they make a change, is it better to bring somebody in who knows nothing about your operation that you've never worked with before, that maybe you've had a couple of lengthy, but really just a couple of interactions with in the form of interviews before that person is hired? Do you bring that person in and all of a sudden make them CEO of your company? Or are you more comfortable with elevating someone who's going to bring their own fresh set of ideas, who's going to bring their own opinions to their new job, but that you know really well? You know their work habits, you know what they're all about, you know who they are as people. And would they ever do that at the front office level, as I'm anticipating they will at the head coaching level? Would they ever elevate Gerard Mayo and Matt Groh or Elliott Wolf or Steve Cargile or Cam Williams, or, name your Pat Stewart, name your Patriots front office type, because they have a lot of talented people, a lot of smart people in that Patriots front office. I'm sure the Krafts know that. Would they ever look at one of their own and say, I know he's coming from the quote unquote Bill Belichick system, but I also know he's not Bill Belichick. And I know he has his own thoughts and hopes and dreams and opinions on all these players, whether they're free agents or draft picks. And I'm comfortable because I'm comfortable with that person, with that individual. I'm comfortable with what I've seen from them over a long period of time. I'm comfortable elevating them and taking whatever blowback I get PR-wise, locally, nationally, for not fully flushing the organization of Bill Belichick ties, I'm okay with that because I know the people that I'm hiring. I know the people that I'm elevating. Whereas if I go with someone completely different, yes, we get change, but do we get the kind of change we really are envisioning? Or is there more uncertainty there? Is there a haziness around a newer person, a fresher face that makes us a little more uncomfortable? Fascinating choice on the Kraft's hands this offseason, if and when they move on from Bill Belichick. How about Josh, who writes? He says, what if Zappe runs the table basically as a starter for the rest of this year? Could he start next year? Josh? I think he could. Now, is he their starter or could he start? Because starter, that label of starter, no, I don't think he would be that guy. That to me implies you are in our plans. You are the future. You are our guy. But could he be a bridge option? If you don't get a Mayfield or Jacoby Brissett, who I have long said would be a great fit for a young quarterback, and he is going to be a free agent, bring Jacoby Brissett back. He's comfortable being a backup. He is one of the best locker room guys in the league, from what I've been told. And I haven't interacted with the guy since he's been in New England. It's been a while. But that's his reputation. Maybe you look past that. Maybe you eschew all those opportunities to sign guys to big money contracts just to be your backup. And some of those are pretty big money contracts. You're talking 8, 9, 10 million bucks to keep Zappe around and make him the starter for now, but he's basically your bridge option. I think that is a possibility. And if he runs the table, if he plays well enough to run the table, yes, that's 100% in the conversation for 2024. Does it move you off of quarterback within the top 3? No, it shouldn't. But as a number 2, 100%. That should be discussed. And I think that's one of these storylines to follow this year. What does this team look like next year? Who are you investing in for next year? For instance, Ezekiel Elliott, to me, worth reinvesting in that guy. Arguably the best veteran addition you made this offseason. 1 year, $3 million. Professional, high effort, high energy, is doing the right things even in the middle of a lost season. That's the kind of guy that I want around. Hunter Henry, same thing. These guys are free agents next year. Keep those guys around based on what they're showing you at the end of the season when these games don't matter. That's, to me, when you can really learn about some of these players. So if Zappe runs the table in the middle of a lost season against some pretty good competition, late in the year here, after everything that he went through earlier in the year, keep him around and certainly talk about him potentially starting games for you next year until the next guy is really ready. MRyan_10 is asking, how about a Jaden Daniels and Malik Neighbors, who's the second best receiver in this year's draft behind Marvin Harrison Jr., also out of LSU, like Daniels? Is there any way the Patriots could land both of these guys? My answer to that would be no. Sorry, I hate to burst your bubble. Both these guys are, in my opinion, going to end up as top 10 picks. I don't know how you end up with 2 of those. You could trade down, get yourself a Jaden Daniels, and then maybe use some of that draft capital that you've acquired, package it with some of your own picks, and then move way up to the top of the, or from the top of the second round into the first, but you're not going to get Malik Neighbors. I don't think, unless you're willing to trade a haul of picks. It might be hard for you, even if you trade down, to be able to get both guys, right? If you trade down, for instance, from 2 to 7, maybe you could still somehow end up with another first round pick in the teens without giving away too much. But Neighbors is going to be gone by then. He is, I've seen in some places, a top 7 pick. Explosive, runs great routes. I think how good he is and how good that receiving room really at LSU was. They might have 2 first-round picks at receiver in this year's draft. That actually might work against Daniels in some circles as we get closer and closer to the draft because, boy, look at all he had to throw with. I'm not going to be holding that against him. I didn't hold it against Joe Burrow. Seems like things have worked out pretty well for him. So I won't hold it against Daniels, but let's keep an eye out for that sort of conversation as we get closer to April. All right, let's come full circle here with our final question from this week's mailbag. And for more mail head on over to NBCSportsBoston.com. We'll have the written form for you there. If it's not there now, it will be very, very soon. But this question is from Das Wonderkid. German, maybe? Will the Patriots get compensation if Bill Belichick leaves, or will the Patriots simply let him walk? Again, we talked about this briefly on the Patriots Talk podcast, but the reason why I say this question takes us full circle is because the answer is essentially, how does Robert Kraft want it to end? I could see it going a couple of different ways. One way is, yes, they get compensation because they've worked something out with another team, an ownership group elsewhere that really wants Bill Belichick, that says, Robert, don't fire him. We don't want to have to compete with team X, Y, and Z. We want to make sure we get him. We will send you, as soon as your final game is over, week 18 of the season, we'll send you a first-round pick, or we'll send you a second-round pick. We'll make it worth your while. Don't fire him. We'll trade for him. Maybe they have some assurances that Bill Belichick would actually be willing to go there. And it gets worked out that way, and the Patriots do get some compensation. Another way this could go is that the Patriots say to themselves, what's best for the team here? We want to avoid a messy breakup. And I truly do feel that they feel that way. But would they ever then say, but it would be best for the football team to get a pick back for Bill? And would you hold on to him, not fire him at the end of the season, and allow teams to essentially bid on the greatest head coach of all time? And because you have Gerard Mayo already on the staff, and because you like him as a potential head coach, you don't have to expeditiously get your head coaching search underway the way some of these other teams that might want Bill Belichick do. And so you hold on to Bill Belichick as an asset and say to other teams, if you want him, let's see what you have. Because we don't have to budge one way or the other. We've got a head coach we like. Maybe they have a front office guy that they like that's already in the building. So they don't need to start bringing people in as soon as the season's over to try and get the best candidate necessarily. I'm not saying this is how I envision it happening. It actually would surprise me if it happens this way, because this would be verging towards a relatively ugly breakup. But again, if they were dead set on getting a pick for Bill Belichick, the timelines that these other teams work on would be a factor, and it would give the Kraft some leverage. I've seen in some places, but why would Bill Belichick ever agree to that? He could just say, no, I'm not going to go to that team you're going to trade me to. I'll just, I guess, retire. You'll have to fire me. You'll be paying me for next year because I'm under contract for 2024. And that's how this is going to end. Again, pretty ugly. Not what you're looking for if you're the Kraft family, in my opinion. But you do have time on your side if you're the Krafts and you want to push it. Because those teams, they've got to figure out what they're doing. They've got to start scouting. They've got to start getting people in their building. They've got to, if they want Bill Belichick and Bill Belichick wants to go there, they've got to start getting other people in the building. And that takes time. And time is ticking. The offseason is something that moves so quickly in the NFL, and there's so much to do. There's the Senior Bowl. There is the Shrine Bowl. There is the Combine. All these things that you have to get ready for. And you have to understand, what your roster is and what it needs. That timeline and the pace at which those things usually happen, it could force a team to give up some compensation, again, just to make sure they get their guy. If their guy is Bill Belichick and they don't want to wait for Robert Kraft to fire him because they got to get going on their plans, that could be one way they end up with compensation. Again, a little bit ugly. Don't see it. I really don't. I think if they're going to get trade compensation, it's probably something that's going to be worked out early. Otherwise, they may just cut ties with them to try to play nice as best they can late in their relationship here. You don't want to burn it to the ground. There's too much history, too many not only great memories, but opportunities moving forward to celebrate Bill Belichick and all he's done here. And while that's not going to help your roster, it's not a first round pick or a second round pick. Wouldn't the fans want that? Isn't that something that fans, I think, for the most part, would want to enjoy and partake in eventually? Wouldn't Bill Belichick want that? Wouldn't the Krafts want that? There is value to that. It might not be what's best for the roster, but it might be what's best for the organization. Which is, I hadn't really thought of it in those terms, but that might be what you have to weigh if you're the Krafts in this instance. Again, a lot of fascinating decisions on their hands as we approach the holiday season, January, the end of the Patriots season, and then whatever comes next for them. All right, that's it for this edition of the Next Pats podcast. Thanks so much to everyone who contributed questions. Thanks so much to the Skull Crusher, John Henry, for putting together what has been a marathon podcast that was not anticipated to be a marathon podcast, but we had some fun topics to discuss, in my opinion, in terms of the questions the Krafts are facing, the path discussion, the blueprint, the model discussion when it comes to what's the best way to add a young quarterback and see him succeed. And then, of course, we want to hear from you again, please. If you've got thoughts on the quarterback blueprint, the quarterback model, Mahomes, Allen, Hurts, Purdy, Burrow, which one do you like? Leave us a comment on YouTube. Leave us a comment on Apple Podcasts. We'll talk to you next week.